What are you going to do when this doesn't flush? In today's video, we're going to talk with Jim Phillips about human waste management. As delightful as that topic sounds, join us. Hey, Provident Preppers, we are excited to have Jim Phillips with us again today. If you missed portion 1 of the Sanitation series, you'll want to go back and make sure you get that. Today, we're going to talk about some really dirty stuff. And Jim is great at exploring all the dirt and grit and all the kind of slimy stuff because it is important. We're talking about our health and our well-being, and sanitation is so important. So, Jim, welcome back, and let's kick into this.
Okay, glad to do that. And yeah, we get into we would say nitty gritty, but no, it's the dirty, nasty kind of stuff that we talk about. You know, the other things we covered in part 1, those are just as serious, and you've got to keep your environment cleaned up around you. But one of the parts of that is we're wanting to prevent these diseases that can be so deadly, the cholera and the dysentery and those kinds of things. And I've used for years, looking back on this Haiti earthquake that occurred in 2010 and what came out of that. And if people were watching that, I watched it very carefully to see what was going on, and then watched for years afterwards with all of the death and disease that occurred to those people down there. And they had, at one point, they had 25% of the population was either asymptomatic with cholera, or they were actually ill. They were clinically ill, or they were just carrier. So you had a million people, or 10 million people down there. You had 2.5 million. Sorry, I'm trying to get my math right. 2.5 million that were either sick or carriers in that. And as I mentioned previously, it took them until 2020 for there to be no more deaths from cholera. Now, there's still other stuff going on. They still have cholera, but it's not that bad. That's a sanitation issue, and most of that is spread through human waste. And so that's what we're going to talk about. Now, we did a little bit, and when we talk about, you know, what are the deadly substances on Earth and things like that, well, human waste is one of the biggest ones we have to deal with. And when I talk about human waste, first off, it's like, this is one of those topics we don't want to talk about because it's dirty and it's embarrassing and everything. I just tell people, get over it and deal with it, because if you don't, it'll kill you. It'll get you sick. And so we have to get real with it. And I had to do that too. I'm an engineer that, you know, worked around clean kinds of things. I have to talk about nasty stuff. So that's one of the things that you have to do for yourself and your family and your household. When we think about human waste, there's really kind of 3 of them. And I'm going to go from the least dangerous to the most dangerous. Urine. Okay. Actually, urine is not a waste. It is a useful resource. And you shouldn't even be throwing it away right now. My wife hates me to say things like that, but it's a useful resource. There's things you can do with it right now. We have then garbage, which we were talking about last time, with all the organic things around us that'll spill and get things contaminated and draw mice and flies and things. But you want to take care of the garbage, keep that cleaned up. But the big one is the fecal matter. What comes out of the human bowel is absolutely laced with all kinds of nasty pathogens that are in there. And you've got to handle that stuff properly, because if you don't, it's a real problem. Now, what we do right now is we have this big porcelain throne, you know, and we take care of that. Most people do. I'll say 95% of the people use one of those things. And so it's like, well, okay, just that's what you do. Flip the lever, it all goes away. I don't have to worry about it. Well, when you don't have water, when the sewer system's broken down, when it's failed, what the heck are you going to do? And you've got to be prepared, because the human body is going to do what the body needs to do. Now, you can grit your teeth for a little while, but after a while, you can't grit your teeth any longer. You're going to have to eliminate. And if the urine's not an issue on that, it's easy to dispose of. And one of the rules when we're talking about the human waste is that we want to be disposing of it properly. And you have to understand that when you're talking about urine, it's not a waste. It's not a nasty, terrible thing, unless somebody's really, really sick with something. But most of the time, you can handle it safely. And just the real quick, I do a whole course on you. We talk for more than an hour about all the things you can do with urine, what it's good for. And some of them people go like, yeah, I'll just tell you what the best thing to do with it is. It goes in your compost. Just get it in the compost because you are a fertilizer factory. That's what you're doing. You're producing fertilizer. You're producing the urea, which is what you buy when you go to the fertilizer store. They take urea, and that's what's used to convert into the nitrogen that your plants want to eat, plus all the other trace elements. So right now, I capture 95% of the urine that I produce, and it goes into my compost pile on that. And my wife, don't tell my wife I said that. Okay. Anyway, she knows it. But the fecal matter, this is another matter. And one of the reasons that when I talk about what you want to do in disposing of human waste is there's 4 words that I use in this that you're going to do. You're going to separate, cover, carry, and bury. That makes it simple to remember in the step that you're going to go through in the beginning to start with. Now, if you're on a septic system, private septic system, and as long as you have water, keep using it. If it isn't damaged, you have water, great. You don't have that issue. People that are on a municipal system, then you've got a problem when there's no water and or the sewer system isn't working. And one of the things you have to understand about a sewer system is that I tell people you've got to think upstream and downstream if you're tied into a public sewer, because you're probably downstream from somebody. And if they can still flush upstream, but your sewer system is blocked, damaged, or what have you, but they're still able to flush, and you have a basement, it's going into your basement, is where it's going to back up into that. And so there's things we'll talk about that too. But you've got to think in terms of how do I protect myself? But that also means how do I protect my neighbors? So you think upstream, downstream. And so the system is damaged, it isn't working, so I can't use it. Don't use it. Even if you have water to flush with, you have to think in terms of, I'm going to be pumping this stuff into some low place, into somebody's basement or a place where the lift pumps aren't working. It's going to be flowing out in the street, and that may be a mile away, but when all the people are sick a mile away from you, you're going to get sick eventually. So we have to think in terms of how do I protect others and myself. So that's one of the reasons why when it happens, even if you have the ability to flush, you may want to consider, I don't want to do that. Now what am I going to do? So you're prepared with this concept of separate, cover, carry, bury. Separate the urine out. Now the reason for that is urine's useful for one thing. It's easy to dispose of. It's not a nasty, terrible thing to do. And in the urine class, we really get into that, but we don't have time now. But I can dispose of that by capturing it. Now, I know that's easier for us male guys than it is for the female, but you still want to do that as much as you can, because once you mix the urine in with however you're capturing the fecal matter, you now have a heavier mass, more volume, and it weighs a lot more, and it's kind of soupy, kind of sloppy, and if you spill it and all these, it's just much better to keep it as dry as possible and separate it that way. So that's one of the things that I teach people to do is, as best you can, separate the urine out from it. Now we're just dealing with the solids, which, by the way, fecal matter is about 70% water anyway, so there's lots of moisture in it. But one of the things you have to understand is what are the rules on this? One of the rules, very simply, is this, and I will go to a source that I like to turn to. Let's just turn to the scriptures. Let's go to the Old Testament. Did you know that sanitation issues are in the Old Testament? When the Lord was leading the children of Israel out of Egypt, he had this whole mass of people, and they've got a big sanitation problem. You ever think about that? 1 million people walking together, living together, you've got a big problem. Well, the Lord gave them instructions. We only get a little piece of it. And this is what he says. It's Deuteronomy 23:13. Go look it up. Deuteronomy 23:13. And thou shalt have a paddle upon thy weapon, and it shall be when thou shalt ease thyself abroad, thou shalt dig therewith, and thou shalt turn back and cover that which cometh from thee. You see, the way I describe it is the master engineer who created this environment knew what he was doing in the soil. When I say soil, I don't mean dirt. I mean the soil that has all the living microbes and things in it. They are designed to break down, denature, and recycle those things. We say the words, dust to dust. We think about, well, the human body, when you're done living in this thing, back to dust. How about everything that passes through you? Dust to dust. And the other part of that story that you need to think about in the long term is, if you're now eating out of your garden, you better be putting stuff back into it or you're going to deplete the soil. Now, you have to do that safely and properly, because if you don't, you get sick. So that's what this whole thing is about. I spent an entire hour on this subject alone, just on the beginning of it, the simple way to do it. So the rule is what we want to do is we want to get the human waste, the fecal matter, in the soil, in the dirt, where the worms, nematodes, microbes, fungi, bacteria, viruses can break it down. That means not inside of a plastic bag sealed up, because it needs to be in contact with the soil. The Lord didn't have to tell the children of Israel, don't bury the plastic bag, because they didn't have plastic bags. Just get it in the ground. But what you're going to do, this is how you convert to begin with. You're going to take that porcelain throne that you've got is one of the things you can do. You can convert it to a dry system very simply by turning off the water, dipping the water out of it, cleaning it very well, lining it with a plastic bag that's big enough, put it in there, and then you can now separate the urine by doing that someplace else, and then leave the solids in that place. And the word was cover. Well, I want to cover it two ways. I'm going to cover it with a carbonaceous, material is what you'd prefer. That's crumbled up dry leaves, dry grass, straw is great, sawdust is perfect. You could use cat litter, but you have to buy it. You could use peat moss and those kinds. I'm going to cover it up with something that's going to be absorbing moisture, and it's going to keep it covered, because I don't want to just go in at once and then have to, use the plastic, take the plastic bag out. You'll go broke on plastic bags. So I'm going to use it as long as I can until I fill that bag up. And the other thing about cover is that I'm going to cover the material itself down in there with a sawdust is a great one. I have barrels of sawdust ready to go. And then I want to cover it by putting a piece of cardboard that I've cut out to fit over the top of the toilet seat. Put the seat down, put the lid down, and if you have a 2-year-old in the house, for goodness sakes, put a brick on top of it, because he's going to be curious what's in there and he wants to play with it. You don't want him playing with that stuff. So you keep it covered up safely out of the way. And then when the bag is full, then you're going to carry it outside. But I also say when you're going to carry it outside, don't just pick up the plastic bag and walk outside with it, because if the bottom falls out of that bag, you got a real problem, because you don't have the wet vac and the steam cleaner and everything. You're going to be scraping that stuff up. So put it in a box or a pail and carry the bag out. And then you're going to have a hole out there. Pre-dig the holes. That means you have to have tools. This is a system. So now I have the holes. You're not going to put it in your garden. You're not going to put it working a road. And I'm going to dig a fairly deep hole. And around fruit trees or bushes, they'll love this stuff. They go nuts for this stuff in the soil, but not in your active garden where you'd have any root crops. And so I dig this hole 18, 24 inches deep. I'm going to put the bag on the side of that hole, and I'm going to dump it in there. Not sealed up in that bag. Don't put a twist tie on it and drop it in there. And I'm going to drop it in that hole. And then the bag goes in the hole, because you don't want it back either, but I want it opened up. And then I'm going to put a little bit of soil on top of that, and then cover that hole up with a piece of plywood, a board, and put a brick on it, and seal the edges with some dirt so you don't have flies and things get down in there. Because if you had to do this every time you had a plastic bag, you're going to spend all your time digging holes. And if you have soil like I do, it's like digging up the Walmart parking lot. I mean, the soil is so hard that it's hard to dig. So I dig a hole. I want to use it for a week or two, depending on the number of people, and you keep layering that up, and you're keeping this thing buried and covered up. Now, there's a few more details in there we don't want to go into. I just want you to understand you need some tools, you need some practice, you need some plastic bags, and this is for short term. This is for a few days, maybe a few weeks, because you need something more long term that you've got to be prepared to do. But you can make this immediate switch. And of course, you can have another thing available to you. And if you have to evacuate, you want to have a 5-gallon bucket and the plastic bags for that, and some of these sanitizers and cleaners. But you ever sit on a 5-gallon bucket? It's awful. That's why it's like, hey, use the porcelain throne. It's screwed to the floor. It doesn't tip over. It's comfortable. And if you have people in the household that their life is now very disturbed by what's gone on, you want to have things to be as normal as possible so they don't freak out. So rather than go over this bucket and do this, no, just sit there. It's just got a plastic bag, and this is what you do. You have a little bucket in there with sawdust, or you could use dirt, but it makes it kind of heavy. I prefer to use sawdust or straw that's chopped up, cover it up, and then take it outside and bury it. And then within a couple of years, it will all disappear and make very rich humus after a few years in there. So that's what you do short term. Now, long term, what are you going to do? Well, you have an option depending on who you are, where you are, that you could use a composting toilet. You can buy them, large ones, built-in ones, and things. That's one thing you may want to look into is composting toilets. They can be expensive, but they work very, very well. If you're in a place where I don't have water, I can't dig holes, whatever it is, then you need to compost it in a composting toilet that'd be in the house. Or the other thing you do is the book you get is this. It's called the Humanure Handbook. Humanure. Humanure Handbook. It's by Joseph Jenkins. He's been teaching this for decades. He is, I'll just say, the master in it. And you get that book, and I'm serious, get that book. And then do what he says in that book and practice and know that you can, that you're in a place where you can. And that's what I have done. And what I'm doing, I don't use that all the time because the flush toilet's more convenient, but I'm set up with that and the materials to do that because should I lose the ability, either lose water or the ability for whatever reason to use a flush toilet, then I'm going to shift over to turning my human waste into humanure by his composting system, which is low cost. Now, there's great composting toilets you can buy. They're big. There's one that'll fit in your house and it'll take care of 20, 30 people. But you're have an investment $10,000, $15,000. If you can't afford to do that, then the book is $25, and the materials to do it is let's say you spend a total of $100 between all the things you need to do, maybe even $150. Then you've got the ability to safely handle, dispose of, and convert your human waste into a useful resource. But you've got to do it right, do it exactly what he says and how he says it. And by the way, just one comment here. Some people say, well, how about the outhouse, the pit latrine? Well, that's what Haiti did, and they had a lot of disease problems. The problem and Grandma and Grandpa had one. Yes, they did. And the pioneers had them. Yes, they did. And what was their problem? They were dying of disease because the flies that can get down on that mass that's down in there, crawl around on it, they come out and crawl on your lunch and your baby's face. Now, if you build an outhouse, it needs to be sealed up as well as like a refrigerator. Everything's sealed to the ground, vents covered and everything, so that you don't get flies in there or roaches or mice in there. And you could still do that, but there's problems potentially with an outhouse. Mine here, the soil is so hard. If I had to dig it with a shovel, it would take me a month or two of backbreaking work to get a hole. If you have a backhoe, that makes it a little faster. I have a neighbor who has a backhoe. We were digging a hole. He couldn't even do it with his backhoe to get it very deep. It's so hard. So you may be precluded because of that, or high water table may prevent you from doing that. But if you do it right, you could use the pit latrine. But one of the problems is when you put the human waste, all the human waste in there, the urine, the fecal matter in there, it is so concentrated with the nitrogen that there's no microbes live in that very well. The ones that are friendly, that'll turn it into humus, it'll take it decades for that stuff to break down because it's so concentrated with the urine that's in there and the nitrogen, and it can be a real smell problem. It can be done if you do it right. That may be an option. There's also moldering toilets you can learn about where you don't put it in the soil. It's held in a 55-gallon drum and allowed to molder for a year or two, and then it breaks down. It'll be okay. So you do have options, but you have to be prepared ahead of time. And that's what I want you to do is research those things. I teach those things in my full class, and I'm adding another section into my hidden deadly danger that's going into these things in greater depth. So handle that human waste, that fecal matter, very careful. It's dangerous. It will make you sick and your neighbor sick, or they will get you sick if they mishandle it because it's spread around in the environment. And what you have is what occurred in Haiti, where you have 10,000 people died from cholera alone, and it took them 10 years to stop the cholera deaths. And that's because they had aid that came to that country. More than $13.5 billion was poured into that country to help them overall. It's probably been more than that by now. And so if you're on your own, you can't fool around. You've got to be very serious from day one. Lots more we could say on that for another hour, but that'll give you the basics that you need to be prepared to do, and or go to the full class I have, and we'll talk in depth about it, and come to my Saturday morning classes because that's open forum Q&A. We'll talk about these things in depth.
Hey, I do have a question, Jim. What about animal manure? So like my dog or my cats.
Hmm.
Tell
Uh,
me, teach me.
well, yeah, it's useful. Now, in a proper composting system that runs hot, you get the heat up, it'll kill the microbes that are in there. You do have to be careful with them because they do carry some things that'll get us sick. And the same thing with your human waste. If it isn't composted completely over a year or two in this composting system that you're going to learn about in Jenkins, you're actually not going to be using any of that stuff until at least it's been composting for 2 years from when you started. And so it takes time, and it also takes oxygen. That's one of the things. This is an aerobic process in with air. That's where you get the friendly bacteria. A cesspool or a an outhouse. That's an anaerobic process, which is a different set of bacteria. They smell really bad, and they can get you sick. And so that's why you have to be careful about that. So in an aerobic with oxygen process, you can break those down, and the pet manures can go in there, even though you hear a lot of people say, don't do that. What are you going to do about it? Well, you got to do something. When it's best to keep it cleaned up and in a place where you can contain it and get it properly composted. Of course, cow, horse, goat, chicken, rabbit, all those things, those are wonderful to get into your compost system too.
Okay, great. Thank you.
This is probably a little challenging for some to deal with because we don't deal with it very much.
Right.
We're so very spoiled that we haven't ever had to really think about these things. But the reality is there are threats that could take away our sewer systems. And you alluded to this a little bit earlier about the possibility of sewage coming back up into our homes. How do we deal with that?
Well, you just have to realize now, if number one, if you're on your own septic system, then you don't have that problem. It may not operate and it may, bubble to the surface and things like that. You have to take care of it then. But the real problem is, as I mentioned, if you're on a municipal sewer and there's going to be people upstream from you, and if the sewer system gets blocked or damaged downstream from you, then they're going to be filling that up. It'll back up into your house. And literally, you can fill the basement. I have pictures of people with basements full of sewage. And when that happens, you have to abandon your house. You have to leave. You can't stay there. You're living over top of a cesspool. That's going to get you sick. Not to mention that you probably had a lot of your supplies in the basement, which you can't take with you. They're contaminated. Even if they were in cans and things like that, just handling them could be a hazardous unless you have lots and lots of water and disinfectants. But in an emergency, you don't. So you have to abandon them. So this is why it's important that you think ahead and take care of this problem. Now, the problem is that now if you don't have a basement, it won't happen. So if you're just slab on grade, no basement, then it's going to come up in the street before it'll come into your house because by code, your house has to be above the curb level in the street, and then the sewage can come up into the curb into the street, flow out of there, but it can't get into your house. So this isn't a problem for everybody, but if you're on a municipal sewer and you have a basement and there's anybody upstream from you, then which most people have somebody upstream. I just happen to be on a sewer system where I'm the highest house up here. And so I can say, I don't have to, but it's still a problem for me because I don't want to flush my sewage into other people's basements because if they get sick, I get sick. So you have to think in those terms. Okay, what do you do about it? Well, where's it going to come up? It's going to come up in the lowest points in your house. That would be a basement, and it would be into your floor drains that may be in a furnace room or in an area where you have things that be wet with furnace room, water heaters, things like that. So that's where it could flow out on the floor in there. It'll also come up if you have a shower or a bathtub. It'll come up in them. Now, the advantage of a shower bathtub is at least you can take a couple inches of it coming in there. But the other place it'll come out, if you have a toilet down there, then it'll probably come out on the floor underneath the toilet, and toilets are notorious for leaking underneath them when you have a backup, so it'll weep out onto the floor there. So you have to just be aware of that. But what you can do is you can get a plug, test plugs that you can use to plug the floor drains. You can buy them at a plumbing supply store. You remove the cover and you can put one down in there. Of course, you have to have it beforehand.
Yeah,
You
I
have to
think
know that you can
Jonathan
use
has
it.
one of those right here. Hold on.
We can just
See,
Yeah,
check
that's
this out.
Yeah, that's one that pumps up, uses a bicycle pump to pump them up. You have others that you put in. They're like the old-fashioned thermos bottle where you screw a nut down on them and they expand out the seal. So you want to get those in there. You can buy them and
right.
have them ahead of time. But one of the things that you need to know is if your house has been installed for a while, those covers that are in there, and particularly if it was old cast iron, those screws are rusted in place and you will not get them out. You're going to have to break them out. So you want to do that now because once, this starts to happen, and how you get a hint is your neighbor who's next door, who's down a little lower than you, he calls up and says, "Hey, Bob, I got stuff coming on my basement. Do you have anything in yours?" You say, "No, I don't. Excuse me." And you go plug yours before it comes up. But if it's already coming up in there, then that's kind of nasty. And this is where personal protection comes in. You'll want to have some rubber boots and some rubber gloves so that hopefully it's not very deep, just, coming out on the floor. You go down there and get that thing plugged up. Now, there's a better solution because we can talk about that. I go through all those things in the class in here, how you take care of the toilet, how you take care of all the drains, the bathtub, and what have you. But the better solution is if you have a newer home, most of them should have by code in most places, they will have what's called a backwater valve. They'll actually have a check valve in there so that when it starts to back up to the house, this will close and so it won't back up into the house. Now, unless you were there when they built the house and you know the code, you won't know that you have one. So it might be worth either trying to find out if there's one that's been installed or having one installed either in the house in the basement, which I prefer because I can service and get to it, or outside. But now that may be a hole that's 4, 5, 6 feet deep that's going to be dug down to your line. They cut the line, they install it. If you have the skills, they're not very expensive. They'll be, $80, $90 worth of materials, but it's the plumber and the hole that'll cost you $400 or $500 to do that. And but install one of those, so now that protects the whole house. So
Now,
that
we
is
have a
worth
little,
considering.
yeah, we have a little story about that.
Yes, my brother-in-law, who was in the home building business many years ago, they had put one in their home, and
A plumber installed it.
the plumber installed it. It was all done, ready to move in, and suddenly they had a problem. Everything was coming up. The plumber had installed it backwards, so it would let stuff come in, but it wouldn't let stuff go out. So make sure your plumber gets that the right way.
Yeah, if you're a do-it-yourselfer, do it the right way.
Right. And you can buy the equipment, you can do it yourself. Like I say, when I used to do plumbing and things like that, just for other people, help them. And I would always install them in a new house in the basement, in the floor, so that I could get at it, service it, take care of it, check it, anything like that. So that would be preferred. And of course, you could even do it after the fact by chopping a hole in the floor if you know where it is and putting it in the basement where you have one line that goes outside. It's best then to do that during new construction, and that will eliminate that problem, certainly reduce it to being very small. So that's one of the things you need to do because you've got to protect yourself from that. Now, if you just have a septic system and the septic system fails, the only thing that's going to happen is you'll flush your upstairs toilet into your basement, and you'll know to cut things off in a hurry and clean that up because I've had that happen in our other house where we had a septic system when this septic system failed for a while, and so you just solve the problem. But you need to know those things now, is what it comes down to, and be prepared now.
Right.
So
And we talked a little bit about the test ball that you could use. That's a great way. But what if you don't have that and you can't get to the hardware store, or the hardware store doesn't have them? What's our next option?
Well, the other thing you do, and it's actually one of the things you do for your toilet when you're converting it into a dry system. One of the things I failed to mention is here, you want to plug that, you dip all the water out, get it clean, get everything sanitized, use the last water in the tank to clean everything up, and then get it dry and clean enough to, as Mom used to say, I want that thing clean enough you can eat off of it. Well, we're not going to eat off of it. I just want it clean and sanitary. And then you're going to plug that hole down in the bottom. Because when you take that water out of that water trap down there, then you can have sewer gases that come back in the house. Plus, you can also have things that'll crawl up into your house in those dry sewer lines. So I want to plug it. And the way that you can do that very simply is you can either get a rubber ball that would fit, or that's just the right size, not a Nerf ball, but one of these solid rubber balls. Or you could fill it with dirt, or you could get a cotton rag and slather it up with, Crisco vegetable shortening, make it this nice greasy mess because I want it to be airtight and watertight, and I shove it down in there. You can do the same thing for the floor drains. Take the top of it, get this rag and get this vegetable oil, vegetable shortening all over it, and then jam it down in there nice and tight. You'll be able to remove it, but it'll keep things from coming back. Now, the other thing you want to do is you want to put the cover back on it and screw it down, because if you have a water hammer that comes back, which could occur in a large municipal system, you could get a water hammer coming back and it'll blow plugs out of there. So you put the cover on it so that I can't blow that plug out of there. And of course, you have to have plugs for everyone. You've got to find all your floor drains where you're going to have to plug them up. Bathtub's another problem. Toilets are another problem. It's a little more advanced, but you can take care of them too. Just be aware of the problem. That's what you need to do. Be aware of it so that you're watching for it, and hopefully you can solve it. Now, there is another way to do this. When everything's broken, everything's shut down, and there's a flood coming. You know it's coming because you see it occurring down. Your neighbors are down lower, and you know there's people upstream from you. Then you'd like to know where your clean out is up close to your house. There's a clean out where you can run an auger down in there to clean the main line if it gets plugged. You want to know where that is. You need to know where it is now. You take the top off of that thing, and then you plug the line from there. You're going to plug your main line. Now this is going to plug it, and you're going to have to dig that thing up to fix the problem. But that's better than sewage in your basement when you have a long-term kind of a thing occur. So I'm going to take and I'm going to jam down in that thing. I need to have a rod that'll run it down. There's a sweep down there that you need to go beyond it, push it beyond it, way down in there. And then I'm going to have some ready mix concrete. I'm going to mix up and I'm going to pour it down there. Well, I said plug it. I'm serious. Plug it. Because you cannot afford to let your basement fill up with sewage when the world is shut down. Because you have to leave. You can't stay. And that becomes a real problem, a forced evacuation in an emergency where you can't take your stuff. That's deadly is what it comes down to. So when I said plug it, I mean plug it. I'm serious.
Wow. That would be plugged.
Yeah, well, and that's how serious this is. That's why I really emphasize these things, because it's such a serious problem. You need to be willing to do that and understand that if you don't do that, and that's going to be our big killer when something comes that's really bad, whether it's just economic shutdown or whatever it is. I don't know, and I don't predict them, but it has occurred before. It could occur now, and we're very dependent on our interrelated systems that keep us very comfortable, this wonderful lifestyle. When it breaks, the power goes off, everything shuts down, it gets nasty in a hurry. You've got to be willing to do what it takes to survive, or you won't, is the bottom line. That's heavy duty. Sorry. It's just reality.
You have successfully talked about a whole bunch of dirty stuff.
Yes.
Let me talk about one more nasty thing here that we haven't even mentioned. And this is one that, we did the cleaners and sanitizers, and you want to have the rubber boots and gloves and masks and, scrubs and all these kinds of things. But there's two of them, and this is in the personal hygiene. We already talked about previously about washing your clothes and getting you washed and what have you, having ways to do that. But you remember what happened just about 2 years ago, beginning of COVID, and I went to the big box stores to take pictures of all the empty shelves where they used to have toilet paper and paper towels, and there was none of them in there. Winco and the others, and there were people standing in line with baskets. Now, we were never short of toilet. We had adequate toilet paper and paper towels. It was only because there was a hoarding run. That was a hoarding. That was a run that needed to never happen. And if people are just buying a little bit ahead of time, you can have some. But if we just bought as we needed, we would have never run out of toilet paper. And this has happened before. This happened back in the 80s where there was another run on it and people were worried about toilet paper. Hey, I'm more worried about what goes in the front end than what comes out the back end. But I do have toilet paper stored. However, let's say that you are really planning ahead and you have 55-gallon drums full of rolls of toilet paper. You have 1,000 rolls of toilet paper.
Wow. What
are you going to do when they're all empty anyway? Now, some people, if they're using a bidet approach, and there's different approaches you can do there, but let's say that I think 95% of the population uses toilet paper. What do you do when you run out and there's no more to get? I've had people in my classes say, well, I couldn't have toilet paper. I'd rather be dead. Well, with that attitude, that can be arranged because you've got to be prepared and you've got to deal with it and have an attitude that says, no, I'll just switch over to another system. Hey, a lot of the world doesn't have toilet paper. And the other thing is, toilet paper's only been around for about 125 years where it started to come in, and it's not really prevalent until, 110 years ago. So it isn't something we've always had. Now, I know there's all the things, corn cobs and cabbage leaves, things like this. Now, there's better things that you can, in fact, use. What do you use that's the easiest thing to do? And you can go look this up right now. Go Google family cloth. Family cloth. And that'll be one of the names you'll find it under. What it is, it's actually it's fabric, rag. It's cotton is best. And people say, oh, yuck, I got to use that. Cool, because you're going to reuse it. I mean, it's like, you're not going to throw it away. This is where you can recycle it again and again and again. You'll find people particularly in the green movement that are doing that. Let's don't cut down trees to, take care of our hiney. Let's use cloth and then wash it. People say, oh, ick. Well, when we started having children back in the 70s, we had cloth diapers. By the way, that's one of the things you'll want to have in storage, even if you don't have infants, because you're going to run out of the disposables. It's going to be cloth diapers, rubber pants, and those things can be reused and recycled. Well, we did that. And so what you're going to do is use that. Now, I'd go through a whole system the way you do it because you don't switch over to that at the first. Let's put it this way. I'm going to use the disposables for the first and worst part of the cleanup, and then I'll use the cloth at the back end of doing that so that I don't have as much nasty to clean up. And then when I have to go purely cloth, and I practice this, I've done this. I don't do it all the time because I don't have to, but I've done it in the bathroom. There's it's a 3.5 gallon bucket. I bought a black one, has a bright orange lid, one of those gamma lids you spin off. And so you use them, and then you use it, you put it in there, and it has a soak in there full of chlorine. I just throw it in there, and after a couple of weeks, they've all kind of built up. I can wash them all at once. You can make your own out of, towels, pillowcases, and I talk about don't ever throw fabric away that's good for rags. You're going to wish you had a lot of rags. Well, here's one of the uses of them. But if you do it right now where you serge the edge or you hem around the edge in there so it doesn't fray, and then you can throw it in your bucket, you'll sanitize them, wash them, rinse them, and then dry them, and then go back and use them again. Now you have basically an endless supply. One of the other things we get into this, so that's a simple idea that you can do that, and so just learn to do it. And then we got one other one here. This is for a guy to talk about on stage to an audience on sanitation, because it's the whole system. You have to think about it all. And that's what we euphemistically gently call the feminine hygiene things. Okay, the disposables are great. They're wonderful. Use them right now. Have some of them stored. What do you do when they run out? Well, now, my mother, who was born in 1920, before we had any disposable for them, and finally, I don't know how we got on the topic for, an older lady discussing these things. That was a little tough for her to do, but she knew what I was doing and talking about. And she said when that time came and she went and asked her mother what's going on. And her mother said, okay, come here, honey, and I'll show you what to do. And they went into a private area and they got out some cloth, some fabric, folded it up, and that's what she did. That's what they used. It was rags. Now make preparations beforehand so that you have ones. And by the way, you can buy some that are recyclable. You buy the cloths. They go under names. There's I can't remember the names of them right now, but anyway, they're the feminine hygiene. They come with a carrier that they go into and a bag for washing, and you just wash them, clean them, sanitize them, and use them again. That's what we had to do before. If you make provisions, you'll have things that are nice and prepared beforehand. Either make your own or buy them. And then there's one other option that you can consider using, and that is things that will, I'll say, block the flow. There's the Moon Cup, the Luna Cup, and there's another one here. I think I have it up here. Goes by now, Diva Cup. Those that you can use, they're soft silicone cups that are inserted. They stop the flow. You can take them out, clean them, and reuse them. So those are things that you need to be thinking about. If you're not thinking about it, you're going to be running around going like, where do I find just a rag? Well, it'd be better to use something different than that.
So
So
as a
those
girl,
are,
can I chime in here?
yeah,
So
please.
okay, so there are some really cool patterns out there where you can actually sew some of these in advance, and the bottom of them will have a liner that will not leak into your underwear, right?
Right.
But one of the other things is they actually sell panties that you can just wear during that time, and you pull them up and you throw them in the washer, and they're really, really cool. So there's both the things that we can do that are homemade and the things you can buy commercially that somebody else has already created that are super fantastic. But there are a lot of options out there. The trick is that you have to get them now and prepare now so that you're ready.
And also practice, use it so that you know you can.
And practice. And then let's talk about our elderly population. So there are a lot of issues with bladder control, right? As you age, sometimes controlling your bladder isn't easy anymore, and that can lead to a lot of issues. Well, a lot of those same things that you might use for feminine hygiene can be used to help when you have bladder control issues. And so it's not just for those of us who are still in that stage of life where we're menstruating, but even those who are older. This is all really important stuff. So
it is.
There you go.
Thanks for rescuing me. Because I can't speak about these things from personal direct experience, but I talk about it in terms of what others have done, what they tell me, and what they don't like and don't like. And that's why it's important for you to get some things and try them. And you may find something, hey, that works well. I don't like that. We'll try something else, because you can experiment without spending a lot of money. And when you find what works for you, then you get a whole bunch of them and you say, well, I don't have that problem. Well, you don't. Do you have children or grandchildren? They may have that same need and that same problem. So you want to set some of those things aside for them, because when they're under distress and they're in the middle of this kind of thing and they don't know what to do, that's going to be your job as grandparents, as parents and grandparents, to say, let me tell you what to do. Let me help you. So we take the stress off of them, because one of the things to understand about emergencies is stress can kill. Stress weakens your immune system. When you're afraid, when you're angry, when you're depressed, your immune system doesn't work as well to throw off some of the diseases. You're more likely to get sick from something. Now, since I'm a system thinker, I'm going to tie into one other thing right now that's brand new. I'm going to be adding this into the online class, the Hidden Deadly Disaster, because what you have to understand is that all of this stuff about being prepared, it kind of ties together. So I'm going to bring in a nutritional component. I'm doing a series of classes right now in my Wednesday night class in publishing that's on nutrition. And I'm not the nutrition expert, but I'm finding things by others. I'm talking about the books as far as I'm concerned. You must have. It's not an option. If you're trying to be prepared, you've got to take care of your nutrition, and you've got to get yourself in as healthy, as strong a position as you can. I go on about 2 hours on that one. But on the sanitation side of things, I thought I was doing a pretty good job, because I've always had a pretty good diet. No Kool-Aid, no Jello, no highly flavored colored thing, no soda pop, all the stuff I eliminated through the years, and eating pretty healthy whole foods and what have you. And then I found out how far off the mark I was. Now, I was already doing okay on the fats and everything, but when I got into what you really need to do for your nutrition and how you get your microbiome, this is all about your gut and your gut health. And if you want to start learning about this, go Google gut health or microbiome, and you will come up with more things than you can watch in 3 days constant. Now, I got into that about 6-7 years ago. I stumbled into it. I started looking at it and going like, wow, this is important. There's a whole story behind why I really dug into this after having 2 heart attacks and 2 strokes. And I've been reading these books, and I'm figuring out I'm eating really healthy. Why am I having, the last thing I had was this stroke, which was in my memory and language area, which causes me to stumble. And I can't remember things, really frustrating. But it's when I was finishing up a series of books, and I'm in the hospital recovering from this nasty stroke, and I got it, what my problem was. Well, I got the rest of the change made. Now, here's how it ties to sanitation in this nasty subject we've been talking about right here. when you get your bowel working properly with the microbiome correct and you're eating the right things and not eating any of the things you should not be eating, there's a long list of them, then when it comes to the cleanup, most of the time I don't even get skid marks, if I can say that delicately. And so when you go back to, if you're eating properly, there ain't hardly anything to clean up. And sometimes there's nothing. Because when the bowel is working right and the microbiome is working right, and you have the mucosal layer in there right and everything gets kind of packaged up and just kind of slides out and there's nothing left behind. I don't know how else to say it. Like, yuck. But what you need to know is you can tell how you're doing in your health by a whole lot of things there. And that is making a huge difference in some of my repair and my recovery that's going on right now, because I'm sleeping better. My pain level is down, my joints. I'm pretty sure my memory is getting a little better and things, but this is taking a while. It took me, 74 years to get in this. I'm 75 now, and I've been working on this stuff for a year. It took me a long time to get here. It doesn't heal all up, and I may not be able to heal at all, but I'm making some reversals and things you shouldn't be able to reverse. That's all nutrition that ties into sanitation, because I don't have as much to clean up. So let me give you some hope on that end, the front end and the back end, that when you do it right, it works out pretty darn good. Okay.
Okay, and I have to just chime in here a little bit with the bidet, because I personally have a bidet, and it's kind of a funny story, because one of our sons went to India and did a lot of work in India, and he loved the bidet, and so he has one for his house, and for John's birthday, he installed one on our toilet. It's only like a $20-$25 bidet. It's a cheap one. It's got cold water, and it was on our toilet for a couple years until, and I didn't ever use it, right? I'm like, there's no way. And then I got sick, and you get to that point where you're just, wiping is so uncomfortable. And so I decided to use it, and the bidet is amazing. Like, it's amazing. And his family takes these little Perry bottles. So after you have a baby, they give you this little bottle, so that, because you're not going to want to wipe then either. And you just rinse yourself using this little squeeze bottle, and they always carry them with them. So no matter where they go, they can use that water to clean up. And then, like, if you're using what you call the family cloth, or the cotton squares or the flannel squares, you're already mostly clean. And so really you're just drying off a little bit, and that helps. So I'm a huge fan of the bidet, and you can do it with very little water, but there you go. That's my 2 cents worth.
Yeah. And really, if you'll get your intestinal health, your bowel health, and your microbiome working right, there is and this was an unexpected thing. I had no idea this is what would occur. And I started to ask, what's going on? Because it's like things are really a lot easier right now, and there's not much. And then I go on, like, now I start to understand about intestinal health, and that goes back to, what did people used to do when they live in the forest or out in the woods years ago? Well, how did they do? They didn't have a problem, because they were not eating what we are eating. They're not eating the STAD diet, the standard American diet, and they don't have that problem. And they're also healthier too. So anyway, yeah, it all ties together. That's the thing that's exciting, because as a system thinker, when I look at this, the whole thing, whether it's sanitation, nutrition, and then it's about hydration, then it's about your attitude, because this really affects your attitude. When your gut microbiome is right, you're actually a much more positive person, because they affect how you think, and they affect your emotions. Emotional health. It has now been shown that there's some of the wrong bugs, they contribute to mental illness in a major way. And the right bugs help clean it up, get rid of it. So need to start studying some of that. You can do some of the same research I've been doing. I'm having a lot of fun doing that. And there are 12 books I tell people, you must have these books if you're serious. For nutrition, there's some others, but for nutrition, there's 12 books you have to have, because not any one single book does it all. And so I've been doing the series on these books right now. So anyway.
That is so cool.
Very, very interesting stuff here.
So, Jim, we appreciate you so very much. Yeah. You can tell he is incredibly knowledgeable with all of these sanitation, everything sanitation. And we strongly encourage you, go to jimsway.com, sign up for his membership. He's got the membership. Like when you go there, there's a lot of free information, but there's a members only part. And I would encourage you to sign up for that. We have, because he's just got such incredible information there. So thank you, Jim.
You're welcome.
And
my pleasure.
for the question of the day today, now that you know, what are you going to do to prepare for the emergency sanitation needs of your family? Comment below, and thanks for being part of the solution.